The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, but it wasn't for me. It was for my wife, Eleanor, a lawyer's receptionist, her voice all professional politeness, asked to speak with her about the property transfer. I thought it was a mistake, a mix-up in the paperwork for the new shed we'd been planning. I walked the phone out to the garden where Eleanor was pruning her roses, a silly grin on my face, thinking we were finally getting the permits. I handed her the phone and watched her face go pale. The color just drained away, leaving her looking a decade older in an instant. I didn't understand. I thought maybe it was bad news about her mother. But then I saw the look in her eyes, a look of utter betrayal that I had never seen before and hoped to never see again. She didn't tell me the truth, not then. She just said it was a wrong number and went inside. For the next 3 days, she barely spoke. That silence was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It was the ticking of a time bomb my own son had built, waiting to blow our entire world apart. Stick with me while I share the story of how my son's wife took my wife's power of attorney and tried to steal everything we had worked for our entire lives. And if this story makes you feel something, anger, sadness, or even just a little bit of understanding, please take a moment to support this channel. Hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share this with someone who needs to know that family doesn't always mean trust. My name is Arthur Vance. For 43 years, I've been married to Eleanor, the kindest woman I've ever known. I'm a retired civil engineer, a man who spent his life building things, bridges, roads, structures that people rely on. I like to think I understand how things are put together. I know how to find weak points in a foundation and how to reinforce them. I know that a structure is only as strong as its base. I brought that same philosophy into my family life, believing that if I worked hard, provided for my family, and treated people with honesty, they would do the same in return. We lived in a modest suburb of Pittsburgh. It was the kind of place where you knew your neighbors, where kids played in the street until the streetlights came on. It was a good life. Eleanor and I built that life from nothing. We didn't start with a trust fund or a family business. We had a dream, and we had a work ethic. I drew the blueprints, and Eleanor managed the money. She was always so careful with the dollar, a trait she learned from her parents who lived through the Depression. We never wasted anything. We repaired things instead of throwing them away. We saved for vacations. We paid off our mortgage early, and we made sure our son Liam had everything he needed. We were firm believers that you didn't buy what you couldn't afford. Eleanor was the financial brains of our operation. She handled all the bills, the investments, the taxes. I handled the physical work, but she handled the numbers. It was a partnership, a perfect balance of practicality and heart. She was a heart. I was just the guy who kept the roof from caving in. Our son, Liam, was our pride and joy for so many years. We poured everything into him. We paid for his education, helped him through college, and even gave him and his wife, Penelope, a sizable down payment on their first house. We thought we were doing the right thing, giving them a head start that we never had. We didn't see it as charity. We saw it as an investment in our family's future. We saw it as love. Penelope, from the moment Liam introduced her, was charming. She was bright, articulate, and had a smile that could disarm anyone. She was a paralegal, so she knew her way around documents and bureaucracy. She impressed me, honestly. She was sharp, a go-getter. Liam was a good man, but he was a little bit lost. He was a graphic designer, creative but not always the most practical. He needed someone with a little drive to push him, and Penelope seemed like the perfect fit. I'm not sure I ever saw her true colors. Maybe I was blind, or maybe I just didn't want to see them. She came from a complicated family background, one she didn't talk much about. She was a mystery, even to us. We often saw her over the holidays. She'd regale us with stories of her complicated cases at work, and she had a way of making my son feel like he could take on the world. I had no reason to distrust her. It was my son's choice, and my son's choice was our choice. I thought I knew my son, but looking back, I realized I was seeing what I wanted to see. He was a man of few words, especially as he got older. He had his own life now, his own family, and we were just part of the background. I guess that's what happens when kids grow up. They leave, and they build a life that doesn't require you. But this wasn't just growing up. This was something else, something darker. For a while, the signs were there, small and subtle, like cracks in a foundation. I just never thought to look for them. Our relationship with Liam and Penelope began to change about a year before the phone call. They started visiting less frequently. When they did visit, Penelope seemed distant, often taking calls in the other room. Liam was quieter, more withdrawn. Eleanor would ask what was wrong, but he'd just say he was tired from work. I didn't push. I made the mistake of thinking that we had raised a man who could handle his own problems. I didn't want to intrude on their lives. There were also conversations about money that seemed odd to me. A few times, Penelope mentioned how well I had set things up for retirement, how comfortable we seemed. I'd laugh it off and say we just saved a little every month, that we never tried to keep up with the Joneses. She seemed very interested in our financial planning. At the time, I thought it was just a sign of her growing up, of her starting to think about her own future. She'd ask Eleanor about her investments, about how she had set up the mutual funds. Eleanor, being the generous and trusting person she was, shared everything. She didn't see it as prying. She saw it as teaching. She saw it as preparing our daughter-in-law for a future that included our son. We had no secrets in our house. That was our rule. And that was the rule that Penelope exploited. We were an open book to a woman who was writing a very different story. Eleanor even mentioned once, after a particularly probing conversation, that she was starting to get a headache from all the financial talk. I told her she was just old, and that Penelope was just looking out for Liam's future. I never put the pieces together. The day the call came from the lawyer about the property transfer, I didn't understand the magnitude of what was happening. I thought it was a mistake, like I said, but the silence from Eleanor told a different story. She was guarding a secret, a devastating truth. Finally, after 3 days of quiet misery, she sat me down in the living room. I knew the conversation was coming. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. You just stand there, frozen, waiting for the impact. She didn't look at me when she spoke. She just stared at her hands, her fingers picking at an invisible thread on her dress. She told me she had signed a power of attorney, a durable power of attorney, a few months earlier. It was a document that gave someone else the legal authority to act on her behalf financially and legally. She said she had signed it because she had a small procedure on her wrist and thought she might be out of commission for a few weeks. She was getting older, she was having trouble with her hands, and she was worried about paying the bills, the taxes, or handling any of the banking. I felt my throat tighten. My mind started racing. Who had she given that power to? She couldn't have given it to me, because I was sitting right there next to her. She didn't need a power of attorney if she was going to be out for a few weeks, because I was right there. She had given it to someone else. My mind froze, filled with dread. I didn't want to ask, because a part of me already knew. She looked at me, finally, with tears in her eyes. Her voice was barely a whisper. She admitted that Penelope had come to her a few months earlier when I was at the hardware store. She was concerned. She said about the stress Eleanor was under. She was worried that Eleanor was forgetting things, that the finances were becoming too much for her. It was such a gentle, loving manipulation. She said she wanted to be prepared just in case, so that she could step in and help if something happened to Eleanor, or if she was laid up in the hospital and couldn't make the payments. She said it was just a simple form, a legal formality to make things easier. All she needed was a signature. I slammed my fist on the coffee table, making the picture frames jump. How could she be so naive? How could she sign a power of attorney to our daughter-in-law without telling me? Eleanor started crying. She couldn't believe she had been so stupid. She had trusted Penelope. She had seen her as a second daughter. She thought Penelope cared about her. I held her for a long time. I felt a terrible, deep-seated anger building in my stomach. But it wasn't directed at Eleanor. It was directed at my son and his wife. I was furious at myself for not seeing it. I was furious at my son for letting this happen. I was furious at that woman for preying on an old woman's trust. In that moment, I realized the foundation of our family was not just cracked. It was shattered. My son, my only son, had opened the door for his wife to steal our home. After I calmed down, I asked her one question. Did she know what Penelope had done with that power? She didn't. She had no idea. She signed it, and that was the last she heard of it until the lawyer called. I sat down with Eleanor and started making calls. I called our bank first, the local branch where we banked for 40 years. I explained the situation to the manager. He was a younger guy, but he was sympathetic. I asked him if anything unusual had happened on our accounts. He put me on hold for a long time. I could feel the blood draining from my face. When he came back on the line, his voice was hesitant. He said there had been a number of large withdrawals, not all at once, but spaced out over a few weeks. He didn't have the specific details, but he saw that some of them were transfers to another financial institution. He couldn't tell me where, not without a court order. My heart started to pound. She wasn't just trying to take the house. She was bleeding our savings dry. We had about $80,000 in that account. It was our life savings, the money we planned to live on for the next 20 years. Eleanor was shaking, and I had to hold her up. I felt this hot rush of pure hatred for my son and his wife. Why didn't he stop this? Why wasn't he on the phone, protecting his mother? It was then that I realized Liam was complicit. He wasn't an innocent bystander. He was a co-conspirator, or at best, a coward who let his wife destroy his parents. I called Liam's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. I tried Penelope's. Same thing. I left a message, my voice cold and sharp, telling them that we knew what they had done, and that if they didn't call us back in an hour, I was calling the police. The hour passed. No call. The betrayal was complete. They weren't just avoiding us. They were planning the next move. They knew what they had done was wrong. They knew it was theft, and they didn't care. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my study, staring at the wall of family photos. The photo of us in Paris, the photo of Liam's graduation, the photo of our wedding day. They all felt like props in a lie. My son, who I had carried on my shoulders and taught to tie his shoes, was trying to put me on the street. I was a veteran, and I'd seen a lot of horrible things in my life, but I'd never seen a son do this to a father. I was no longer just a father. I was a target. I knew I had to fight. I knew I had to protect Eleanor. She was heartbroken. It wasn't about the money to her. It was about the love. She believed that love conquered all. She was so pure of heart, so determined to see the good in everyone, that she couldn't accept that her own son would do this. She was in denial for another week. She kept saying Liam would never do this. She kept saying Penelope must have misunderstood the power of attorney. I tried to tell her that misunderstood powers of attorney don't move tens of thousands of dollars out of a joint account. She wouldn't listen. She wanted to see them. She drove to their house, hoping for a civil conversation. She came back 2 hours later, her face blank. She didn't say a word. She just walked upstairs and locked herself in the bedroom. I had to take control. I'm a builder. I fix things. So I started building a legal case. I contacted a lawyer who specialized in elder law and fraud. His name was Daniel Harris, a sharp guy in his late 40s. He had seen cases like this before. He explained to me that a durable power of attorney is a powerful tool, but it also comes with fiduciary duty. It means the person using the power of attorney has to act in the best interest of the person who granted it. They are legally required to act as a trustee. Penelope was legally required to use that document solely for Eleanor's benefit, not for her own. He smiled a grim smile and said she had violated that duty in the worst possible way. He said the withdrawals and the impending sale of the house were prima facie evidence of fraud. He told me to get a court order to freeze the accounts and to stop the property transfer. That was the first good news I'd had in weeks. We went to court the next week. I had never been to court for anything like this. It was a civil hearing, not a criminal trial, but the tension in the room was something I could taste. Liam and Penelope were there on the other side of the aisle. I looked at my son. He wouldn't look back at me. He was staring at his shoes. Penelope, however, had a glint in her eye. She was confident, still wearing that lawyerly charm. She had a lawyer, a local guy with a loud voice who was trying to paint me as a paranoid old man, and my wife as a senile old woman. He told the judge that Eleanor had full mental capacity when she signed the power of attorney, and that Penelope was simply trying to help an aging couple manage their finances. He said she was consolidating accounts and paying bills. It was a good story. It was a lie, but it was a well-crafted lie. He made it sound like we were just two paranoid old people who didn't understand how the modern world works. He even produced documents showing that Eleanor had signed the document herself. She had, of course, but he was trying to use it as a weapon to show that she was in control, and that Penelope was simply the executor of her wishes. The judge, a stern older man named Judge O'Brien, looked at all the documents. He looked at my wife, who was barely holding it together. He looked at Penelope, who was smug, and then he looked at Liam. The judge leaned forward, an old-fashioned man with a sense of purpose. He asked Liam a direct question. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice low but clear, "why didn't you just ask your father for a loan if you were in trouble? Why did you have your wife take your mother's power of attorney?" The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. It was the question I had been asking myself for weeks. It was a simple truth that unraveled all their lies. There was a long pause. Liam shifted uncomfortably. His face was red. The lawyer for my son and Penelope tried to object. He said the question was irrelevant to the validity of the power of attorney. But the judge silenced him with a look. He wasn't interested in the legal definition of a power of attorney. He was interested in the truth. He wanted to know why a son would help his wife steal from his parents. Liam finally looked at me. His voice cracked. He said, "I didn't want to ask. I couldn't. I was too embarrassed." He looked at Penelope, and I saw a flash of something in her eyes. It was anger. She was angry that he was being honest. She was angry that he was breaking the script. In that moment, I realized that my son was a coward, yes, but he might not have been the mastermind. He was a puppet. He was manipulated by a woman who saw us as a payday. The judge nodded and dismissed the proceedings, ordering a full investigation. He said the power of attorney was frozen, and the house could not be sold until the matter was resolved. It wasn't a victory, but it was a stay of execution. It bought us time. It stopped the bleeding. Over the next few months, Daniel Harris, my lawyer, went to work. He subpoenaed bank records, credit card statements, and financial accounts. The evidence was damning. Penelope had used that power of attorney to transfer money from our savings to a new account she had opened under Liam's name. She had used it to pay off their own credit cards, car payments, and even a down payment on a vacation home in the Poconos. She had literally tried to buy a cabin in the woods with our life savings. She was a predator in a suit, and she had perfectly targeted my gentle, trusting wife. I was sick to my stomach. The vacation home we had saved for our entire lives to buy for our retirement had been taken by our son's wife. It was during this legal battle that I started to learn what was really going on in Liam's marriage. I hadn't spoken to him in months, but the lawyer's documents painted a picture. Penelope was a control freak. She had been hiding their own debt from me and Eleanor. She had pushed Liam to break ties with us. He told me later, in a tearful phone call, that she was constantly telling him we were holding him back, that we were controlling him with money. She had isolated him from his friends and his family, making him totally dependent on her. My son was a victim too. He was a victim of emotional abuse and manipulation. He had lost his way, and he had been so broken down that he couldn't even fight back. He was trapped. He didn't have the courage to ask for help. He was ashamed. He was a man who had been stripped of his pride. The climax of this whole ordeal came in a different courtroom, a few months later. It wasn't about the house anymore. It was about the theft. The district attorney's office had gotten involved. They had reviewed the evidence and filed criminal charges against Penelope for fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. The power of attorney was a legal document, but forging a signature or using it for personal gain crosses a line. It is a felony. Penelope was handcuffed in the hallway of the courthouse. I saw her being led away by a bailiff. It wasn't a victorious moment for me. It was just heartbreaking. I thought about my grandson, who was just a little boy. I thought about how he was going to grow up without a mother, or at least without a mother who wasn't a felon. And I thought about my son. He was standing there, alone, watching his wife be arrested. It was the lowest point in his life. I walked over to him. I didn't hug him at first. I just stood next to him. We watched her get into the back of a police car. He was crying. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. "I didn't know how to stop it. I lost myself." I put my hand on his shoulder. "We all make mistakes," I said. The question is what you do next. The trial was a whirlwind. Eleanor had to testify against her daughter-in-law. She spoke about the betrayal, how she had been tricked into signing the document. It was a tearful testimony. The jury was moved by her story. They saw a gentle old woman who was taken advantage of by a skilled manipulator. The evidence was overwhelming. She was found guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 3 years in a state correctional facility. As she was led away, she looked at my son with pure hatred. It was a look that said, "You did this to me." But my son looked back with a strange sense of peace. He had finally told the truth. He had finally escaped. In the aftermath of the trial, we had to rebuild. We didn't get all of the money back. The Poconos cabin had been seized and sold, but the proceeds were used to pay off the legal fees and the debts Penelope had accrued. We didn't get the $80,000. We got about 30. It was a loss, but we got the house back. The property transfer was voided because it was obtained under false pretenses. The judge had ruled that the power of attorney was invalid because it had been obtained through fraud. The title was ours again. Eleanor and I went home that day, and we didn't say a word. We just walked into our living room and held each other. I could feel her body shaking. She was crying. "I can't believe I was so stupid," she kept saying. I just held her tighter. "We are okay," I said. "We are still here. We have each other." Liam started coming around more. He had to start over. His marriage was over. He had lost his wife, his home, and a lot of time with his son, but he was finally free. He moved back into the guest room for a while. He didn't ask for money. He just wanted to be near his mother. He needed to rebuild his relationship with us. It was slow work. There was a lot of anger. I was angry at him for not protecting his mother. I was angry at him for being so weak. But I was also proud of him for finally coming home. He was a broken man, but a broken man can be fixed. It took a long time to forgive him. It took a lot of long talks. I had to accept that he had been a victim, too. He was manipulated by a woman who was a master at her craft. But he still made choices. He still chose to help her. He was complicit, and he had to own that. One Sunday, after church, we all sat around the kitchen table. It was just the 3 of us. Liam, Eleanor, and me. My grandson was in the living room watching cartoons. It felt normal for the first time in years. We ate roast chicken and talked about the weather. The conversation drifted to the future. Liam told us he'd gotten a new job, a good one, with a tech company. He was paying his own bills. He was taking care of his son. He had finally become a man. It was a slow recovery. The betrayal had done deep damage to all of us. I found myself becoming more protective of Eleanor, more suspicious of people in general. I started carrying a tape recorder in my pocket, always documenting conversations. I became a different person. I was harder than I used to be, but I was also smarter. I learned that not everyone who smiles at you is your friend. I learned that family can be the most dangerous enemy you'll ever have. But I also learned something else. I learned about the true meaning of family. It's not defined by blood. It's defined by sacrifice and loyalty. My son had betrayed me, but he came back. And when he came back, he was honest. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just worked for it. He rebuilt the bridge he had burned down. And I let him, because I realized that the greatest lesson I had learned in this whole ordeal wasn't about how to defend a house. It was about how to build a family. It was about the resilience of love. Eleanor taught me that. She never gave up on him. Not once. She kept the door open. Her love was a foundation that saved all of us. It wasn't her money or her power of attorney that was stolen. It was her trust. And watching her get that trust back, watching her heal, was the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. In the end, I learned something profound about revenge. Everyone kept asking me if I was happy that Penelope went to jail. I wasn't. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. But the greatest revenge wasn't the conviction. The greatest revenge wasn't getting the house back. It was looking at my son, a man who had been lost, and seeing him come home. It was seeing my wife smile again. It was sitting on my porch on a warm summer evening, watching the sun go down, knowing that my house was still my house, and my family was still my family. The judge asked one question. Why did my son just ask for a loan? The answer was simple. because he had lost his way. But the bigger question I had to answer for myself was, why did I let him come back? And the answer was just as simple. Because he was my son, and a house is just walls and a roof. But family is a home, and a home is built on trust. And I had that trust back. I had my home back. And that, in the end, was the only victory that mattered.